The electromagnetic interference. Humans have been researching the Great Pyramids and the Valley of the Kings for centuries. Despite the amount of time that we've spent crawling around tight spaces, we have yet to unlock every secret that these mystifying structures hold. In our effort to preserve these monuments, we've refused to open numerous parts of the pyramids, and because of this, many of its tombs remain untouched and are likely to stay that way. However, this conclusion was not one that Egyptologists were ready to accept. They wanted to know the secrets of the ancient structures at any cost. Well, that cost, it seems to be in the upwards of a few $1,000,000. Late in the 20th century, archaeologists began to use more scientific means of excavating and researching tombs, and they began using small robots to fit into the spaces where the average human could not. By doing so, they would be able to peer into rooms that have not seen the gaze of man for over 4,500 years. And on a side note, a few years after this technology was implemented, Canadian director James Cameron would use similar technology in order to research the famous Titanic wreckage for his movie. This technology would begin to be put into use to research the pyramids in a safe and preservative manner. They had slight success, that was until they attempted to peer into one of the Queen's chambers. As the robot approached the tomb through a small crawl space, it was able to snap a single photo of what seemed to be ancient graffiti. Then, when it attempted to move closer to peer into the tomb, it began to malfunction and shut off. Allegedly, the process was repeated multiple times with different robots, and the same malfunction occurred in every instance. The engineer who built the robot said that the malfunction resembled that of a small continuous EMP burst. However, it's been 25 years since this incident was first observed, and we are still unable to identify the source of the interference. Alien conspiracy theorists like to use stories like this one to prove that the Egyptians worked in tandem with extraterrestrials. The Ghost of Khufu. With the amount of sorcery and witchcraft that the Egyptians took part in, you can't really be surprised when you see a few ghosts lurking about the corridors of the Great Pyramids. One of the most famous apparitions that's been seen around the city is that of Khufu, the second pharaoh of Egypt. It is said that Khufu was very proud of his Egyptian culture and went out of his way to preserve and elevate it at any cost. The most notable instance of this was seen when he commissioned the Great Pyramid of Giza. He wanted a pyramid that would serve as his tomb, as well as a cornerstone of Egyptian culture. And as you might assume, Khufu would be rolling in his grave if he learned about the commercialization of his once great kingdom. Well, it does seem as though that is exactly what's happening. Over the past century, strange stories have surfaced regarding an oddly dressed man who harasses tourists in the nighttime. These tourists have noted that a man, dressed in ancient Egyptian clothing, walks around on the streets in the early hours of the morning, simply staring at those who pass by. In many cases, these same people said that the man entered their rooms and began yelling and demanding that they leave immediately. When these reports finally reach the local authorities, they're just written off as a drunk tourist who was trying to stir up some trouble. This would remain the explanation until police learned that this exact same incident had been going on for nearly 60 years. One group of archaeologists even claims to have seen the man twice, nearly 20 years apart, and it seems as if he hadn't aged a day. The mysterious figure is believed to be the angry ghost of Khufu. And ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts from around the world believe that Khufu is trying to take back his culture, one that he feels has been stolen. Pragmatists tend to believe that this is just a case of mass hysteria, which could very well be the case. But this still doesn't explain how some of the most logical and scientifically minded people from around the world have all had an identical experience for 6 decades. I wonder if Khufu still hangs out with the ghosts of Howard Carter. Paul Brunton. In the early 20th century, there was a popular British philosopher by the name of Paul Brunton, and Brunton was known for being one of the most culturally literate people of his time. He would spend months at a time studying yogis, monks, and spiritualists from different countries around the world. And while studying amongst the yogis, he heard rumors that the Great Pyramids of Egypt held spiritual energy which caused some to see full-bodied apparitions. Even though Brunton was interested in the spiritual aspects of each culture, he was ultimately a pragmatist and disregarded the stories. He would then continue to ignore the claims. That was until he began to hear the story from numerous monasteries and churches from around the world. That's when he finally decided to pack his bags and head on to Egypt. When he arrived, he had an unsettling feeling that there was something rather strange about the entire city. He was also incredibly surprised to see the amount of attention that the pyramids had gained since their excavations just a few decades earlier. Brunton immediately sought out the local government to ask permission to spend the night in the king's chamber, and after a few harsh negotiations, Brunton was able to gain it, but only with the help of local police who were actually fans of his work. The police signed a waiver, taking full responsibility for his life in the event that he died during the experiment. They happily agreed, and Brunton was then off to spend a night in the world's greatest graveyard. After exploring the pyramid for a few hours, he then retired to the king's chamber to begin his observation. The police would leave the pyramid just before midnight per Brunton's request, and once he was alone, Brunton put out his candle, sitting silently within the tomb. After a few hours of this silence, Brunton started to think that all the stories and rumors that surrounded the pyramids were simply campfire tales in order to scare the children. Just as he finished that thought, though, he saw a figure in the dark slowly shift across the room. Brunton then called out with no response and began to hear wailing followed by a distant chant. He would search for his tape recorder in hopes of getting the event captured, but it had gone missing from his bag. And just as he was reaching for his flashlight, he felt like he was being paralyzed. Not sure if it was his own panic or an external force acting upon him, he turned his gaze toward the doorway and saw the flicker of firelight making its way down the hall. He would assume that this was just the police coming back to check on him, but then thought it would be quite odd for them to carry a torch. A figure appeared in the doorway, dressed in ancient Egyptian garb as depicted in the hieroglyphics. The figure then looked around the room and soon walked away. That's when Brunton's paralysis subsided almost immediately, and he quickly turned on his flashlight, sprinted down the hall, and out of the pyramid. As he would exit the corridor, he saw his tape recorder neatly placed on a stone in front of him, and asked the police if they had placed it there, and all of them said they had not. In fact, they even remember looking at the blank face of the stone as they were leaving. Brunton never again entered the pyramid after this experience, and he was convinced that he was unwelcome. Curse of the Pharaohs. Ancient Egyptian culture and its obsession with polytheistic religion and sorcery are almost inseparable. Most of the stories depicted in the hieroglyphics are just that, stories. Curses, gods, monsters, it all sounds more like myth than historical fact. That was until famed archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the long-lost tomb of King Tutankhamun. While the tomb lies in the Valley of the Kings, the research into pyramids coincide with his excavations. It's believed that the strange incidents that occur in the two locations are connected by what is called the Curse of the Pharaohs. So what exactly is so insidious about this curse? Well, Howard Carter, he brought a small team on the excavation mission, and they almost all perished due to mysterious circumstances over the next several years. Most of these deaths had eerie similarities, along with strange connections to Egypt. The story all begins in the moments after Carter opened the tomb. One of his colleagues, Lord Carnarvon, asked Carter if he could see anything through the slight breach in the tomb. Carter famously exclaimed in almost a mesmerized voice, "Yes, wonderful things." Just after those words were uttered, the entire group claims to have heard wailing noises that were so unsettling, nobody uttered a word until they left the area. While they were completing the excavations, crew members claimed to see strange white orbs floating through the passageways. Some even said that they experienced full-on hallucinations, where they believed that they were witnessing ancient ceremonies. These few men quickly left the project, as the stress was simply too much for them to bear. Then, just 47 days after opening King Tut's tomb, Lord Carnarvon died of a mosquito bite. Thousands of miles away, And even stranger, another event would take place. His dog then began to howl in agony until it simply just laid down and died. His friend, who came to pay his last respects and visit the tomb, slipped into a feverish coma and then died 12 hours after. And one of the leading members of the expedition, Arthur Mace, also slipped into a coma and died of an unknown cause just days after Carnarvon's death. Radiologists who were tasked with dating the remains of King Tut died after complaining about severe fatigue while working on site. And another Egyptologist by the name of James Henry Breasted returned home to find a cobra in his canary cage. For those of you who don't know, the cobra, well, it was a famous symbol of Egyptian monarchy. Needless to say, the bird was dead. And just a few weeks after that, another member of the expedition took his own life, all after having gone mad. The only person who remained from the original expedition was old Howard Carter himself. Carter seemed to be the only one who didn't suffer any kind of immediate consequences of the supposed curse, and went on to live for another 17 years before dying of lymphoma. Since the initial excavation mission, other archaeological groups have visited the cave of King Tut, and many of them have also suffered strange deaths and events. One group who visited the tomb decades after the death of Carter claims that they saw him standing in the tomb, analyzing the hieroglyphics as if he were still working on the project. The ghost of Carter is reported to have apparently been looking around at the walls for a few minutes and then simply walked out of the room when he was finished. Even to this day, various archaeologists claim to have had similar experiences when inside of the tomb. This has been a look at some of the most gripping stories about the Egyptian pyramids. But do you have any? And did we miss any? Let us know all about it in the comments below, and thanks for watching.